Chapter 3. After the next morning's intercom announcements were over, Mrs. Pigeon went to the front of the class with a paper in her hand. "Is your mother better?" Bernie asked. Mrs. Pigeon looked sad. "No," she said, "I'm afraid not. When you're very old, as my mother is, you just start to give out, and you don't get better. But yesterday after school I went to see her, and I read poems to her again. Her own poems. You know, at one time, my mom was a very serious writer." "Is that one of hers?" Barry asked, pointing to the paper. Mrs. Pigeon nodded. "Another haiku?" asked Keiko. "No, this one is different. I know some of you like hearing poems that rhyme, so I looked through my mother's poetry and found a lovely rhyming one." "I hope it's not long," said Malcolm. "That poem you read at Halloween was long." Mrs. Pigeon laughed. "Anybody remember the name of that one?" she asked the second graders. "Barry, you're my student who remembers everything. You're the memory champion of the class." Barry grinned and nodded. "It was Little Orphan Annie, and the name of the author was James Whitcomb Riley." "Good for you. That's correct. I read that one because it was about goblins and scary things, so it seemed just right for Halloween." "But you're right, Malcolm. It was quite long." Gooney Bird raised her hand. It made a clanking sound because she was wearing a large number of bracelets on that arm. Gooney Bird liked jewelry a lot. "Sorry for the clank," she said. "I'm taking my bracelets off in a minute because they make it hard for me to write. They clank on the desk." "How about the gloves?" asked Mrs. Pigeon. "They don't interfere with your writing?" Gooney Bird was also wearing her fingerless gloves. "No, actually, I think they help with writing because they keep my writing hand warm and make words flow out of the paper better. It's like when I warm my brain with a hat." "I see. Did you have a question? Is that why you raised your hand?" "No, I just wanted to say something about longness. I think a poem should be just smack exactly as long as it tells you it should be." "As it tells you?" Mrs. Pigeon repeated with a puzzled look. Gooney Bird nodded. She pulled her bracelets off and stacked them on her desk carefully, making a round tire of the brass circles. A round tower. I think I should go back and start again. Remember, when we stumble, we should go back to where we last remembered and begin the full thought again. Gooney Bird nodded. She pulled her bracelets off and stacked them on her desktop, carefully making a round tower of brass circles. "Yes, writing a poem is the same as writing a story. You say what you want to say, and then it tells you in your brain, 'Stop here.'" Said the teacher, thinking. "I believe you're right, and that we should all listen more carefully to our brains." "You might try warming your brains with a hat," Gooney Bird suggested politely. Malcolm held up his fist and pretended it was a microphone. Brain to Malcolm," he intoned in a deep voice. "Wear underpants on your head." "Teacher to Malcolm," Mrs. Pigeon said, holding up her own invisible microphone. "I'm going to read this morning's poem now, and I want you to pay attention. You were one of the ones who wanted rhyme." Standing in front of the class, Mrs. Pigeon carefully unfolded the paper and read it aloud. "My Daughter" by Mrs. X. Hey, Tyrone called out, that's you. If your mom write that, then you be the daughter, right? That's true, said Mrs. Pigeon. This is a poem about me. My mother wrote it many years ago, so it's a poem about me when I was your age. Cool, said Tyrone. Mrs. Pigeon, you ought to say the author's real name, not Mrs. X, just because we call her Mrs. X. That doesn't mean it's her author name, Chelsea pointed out. You're correct, Chelsea. But you know what, class? My mother has something special about her name, and I want to surprise you with it. But not yet. So for now, her author name is going to be Mrs. X. Is that all right? All the children nodded. I'll start again. My Daughter by Mrs. X. Daughter, laughter, spelled the same. Patricia, my laughing daughter's name. Mrs. Pigeon picked up the chalk and wrote the 2 words on the board. Daughter, laughter. Yep, they ought to rhyme, Tyrone said. Look at that. It's crazy that they don't rhyme. That poem wasn't long, Malcolm said in a relieved voice. It's very sweet, Felicia Ann said. But it tells a lie, Nicholas announced. You said your mom wrote it, so her daughter's name ought to be... He hesitated, thinking. Mrs. Pigeon smiled. That's my first name, Patricia. Some people call me Patsy or Pat, but my mother always liked my full name best, Patricia. She read the short poem to them again. It's just 2 lines, she pointed out. 2 rhyming lines. Hear that? Same and name. The children nodded. They said the words aloud. Same, name. This kind of poem is called a couplet. 2 lines rhyming. Probably pretty easy to write, I'm guessing. So here's the assignment, class. During our writing time today, I want each of you to try writing a couplet. Then, at the end of the day, we'll read our couplets aloud. Do they have to be about Patricias? Malcolm asked with a scowl. No, but that's a good question, Malcolm. And I have an idea. Let's do this. Let's each write a couplet about our own family, okay? Malcolm sighed. He lived in a very noisy, complicated family because of the triplets that had been born the previous spring. Malcolm was still adjusting to that. Here's a poem about my family, he said with another scowl. Crash, bash, smash. That's what it sounds like at my house most of the time. Wait till writing time after lunch, Malcolm, Mrs. Pigeon suggested, and maybe you'll be able to come up with a couplet about triplets. Goodness, she laughed. Couplet? Triplets? That's almost a rhyme, isn't it? Malcolm just rolled his eyes. We're going to stop there for today, and you can begin thinking about couplets and how you will write a couplet about your own family. We'll finish reading the examples of what the students at Water Tower Elementary wrote, and then we'll look forward to hearing yours as well. But for now, we'll just enjoy thinking about couplets.